What was it like growing up in Ottawa?
It was great. When I think back, it was a wonderful time, too. There was no crime. People never locked their doors. Everybody was friendly. Nobody sued anybody. And it was a great time to live compared to today.
It's a funny time we live in, I think.
Huh?
We live in a funny time.
We live in a terrible time right now with all the crime
The drugs are terrible.
and these millions and millions of illegals coming. If that continues, the Americans will be a minority.
Within the next few years.
Yeah, there'll be more illegals in the country than Americans.
The guy that drove me here, I took an Uber. The guy that drove me from Cuba, he didn't know any English. And I was talking to him fast because
Do you think he came across the border?
I don't know, I didn't want to.
Probably.
But I was talking really fast because I didn't want to be late and stuff. So I'm saying, you got to make sure it's the right place. I didn't want to mess it up, And he said, I don't understand you.
Oh, really?
I said, oh.
But did he know where he was taking
Well,
them?
they put it all on the GPS.
Oh, yeah.
And so.
I see.
I made it. So you like growing up there. What did your father do for a living?
My father was a neurologist,
Okay.
and I knew at an early age that he was a neurologist because he always kept telling me to piss off.
So when you were a kid, there was TV. Did you watch a lot of American TV?
Oh, yeah.
What did you watch?
Well, I was a big radio fan when I was very young. I used to put the radio under the covers and listen well on into the night when I was supposed to be asleep. But I love radio because you formed your own pictures,
Uh-huh. Where's some of
But
your
then television came along and, oh my God, that was terrific for me. I mean, I just had a lot of favorite shows,
Milton Berle? Were you a big fan of his?
Not really.
Why not?
No, I don't know. I just thought a lot of his humor was kind of silly.
He's silly.
But he sure was popular, though, It's like Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin when they were teamed up. A lot of it was kind of dumb, silly, clowning around, being
They were
crazy.
Huge. They were huge.
But a lot of people liked that. But, Jerry dropping dishes and cutting people's ties off and everything. Kind of silly, but they sure were big.
They were huge.
And then when they broke up, they thought Dean, that was the end of his career.
He made that movie 10,000 Bedrooms, and everyone hated it. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't great, but
yeah, but it wasn't a great movie. I mean, when he did The Young Lions, that's when he started his career.
that's a great movie.
Yeah.
He kind of plays himself almost, doesn't he?
Yeah, he did. He did in that movie. He usually played himself, yeah. He was a very professional, though. Dean knew what he was doing, just didn't like to rehearse.
And that's good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, when you did his television show, you never saw him until time to shoot the show. So they had a stand-in do everything. And sometimes you didn't remember what the stand-in did, and sometimes you'd go to talk to him and he was on the other side of the room.
Oh, but that could be bad at times too, right?
Yeah. You had to roll with it, but it was kind of unusual to do a TV show and never work with the star.
But people loved him also.
Oh, people loved Dean. And the thing about Dean was, when he screwed up and things went wrong, that's when he was at his funniest. People loved that.
He just seemed so comfortable in his own skin.
Yeah. He just rolled through life without a problem. Nothing impressed him. Frank was so obsessed with performing in front of people with power, like presidents. Dean could care less, Frank would say to Dean, "Hey, we're going to the White House to perform for the president." And Dean would say, "Who cares?"
Do you ever see Dean get mad?
Yeah, I did. One time I saw Dean get mad. Never on the roast. He was always great on the roast. And I never saw him drunk except one time at the first Ronald Reagan inauguration, backstage. He was pretty plastered. And Frank prevented him from going on. He said, "You're not going on." And Dean said, "Like hell, I'm not going on. Who the hell are you telling me that?" And Frank knew that if he went on, he was going to make an ass of himself because he was bombed. But he insisted on staying and going on. And finally, Frank had to literally get two guys to escort him off to the hotel. And he was pissed. But Frank did him a big favor because if he'd gone on, who knows what he would have said.
When I was a boy, I just got a VCR. That's 1981, I think, right? Mm-hmm. The first. I just got a VCR, so VCRs were a big deal. I think it cost me as a little boy. I think it cost $1,500–$1,600, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
I had a little job, and it's a long story, but I got a VCR. I recorded it, and it had the names, and I'm like, "Where's he at?" I still have it to this day. And what I remember was he was sitting in the audience laughing. I never knew why he didn't go on. Years later, I found out. But he performed at the second one in '85.
What, inauguration?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, I was at that one too. He was sober then.
That boy dying, I think, ruined him.
What?
His boy passing away did.
Oh yeah, that just absolutely did him in when his son was killed.
One last thing about Dean is, it looked like he was trying to make a transition. He had a movie called Mr. Rico where he was a detective. Do you remember that or not?
I remember the name.
It didn't do well. He looked much older. He was unshaven. They wanted to do a TV series and never came to fruition.
I never knew he did that.
Yeah.
He did a pilot?
No, he did the movie.
Oh, he did the movie.
And it's a fine movie. It's not. He's Dean Martin being a detective.
He's a detective?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You liked British films as a kid.
Oh, I love British films.
Why?
Because they were real, and they did a lot of detective movies, and the acting was absolutely superb. I mean, English actors didn't care how big the part was. It's just what it was. I mean, if it intrigues them and it was a good part, they didn't have to be the star. And a lot of English actors played different parts all the time. Americans usually are typecast, but British actors like Alec Guinness and John Mills played all kinds of parts, detectives and murderers, and then John Mills played that sort of little hunchback in that movie with
Not Great Expectations.
the one that Ryan's Daughter,
Oh, you're right.
and won an Oscar, I think, for it. Yeah.
That bitch of a
So
movie.
they were more interested in the character and other than being the celebrity or the star.
They just seem more theatrical to me. That's my impression.
Yeah.
The English actors.
I loved Jack Hawkins, and I loved, Alec Guinness, and I loved John Mills, and I loved so many British actors,
I like Robert Shaw. Isn't he English too?
Robert Shaw.
He
yeah.
was wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're really young, you meet Alan Ladd.
Yeah.
He's wonderful.
Well, I was such a big fan of Shane. I mean, that movie Shane had a big effect on me because it was about a little boy who was in awe of a gunfighter, and you kind of related to Brandon DeWilde as the boy in it, and then Alan Ladd was the hero and the soft-spoken, laid-back character until the end, and so that movie had a big effect on me. So I had an Alan Ladd scrapbook And I had hundreds of pictures of him in my scrapbook. And when he came to Ottawa, my hometown, and I was a teenager, he came to Ottawa because he was making a movie called Saskatchewan with Shelley Winters out in Western Canada. And he came to Ottawa to Crawley Films to do some dubbing for the movie. And when I found out Alan Ladd was coming to Ottawa, I mean, I was in my glory. I was going to meet him for sure. And because I was sketching at that time, I'd done a lot of sketches. I sketched a picture of Alan Ladd, and I found out that he was going to Crawley Films to do some dubbing. And I got there at 6 in the morning, and he didn't show up till 11. So I was standing around from 6 o'clock in the morning. I was first in line. And when he finally arrived, I was the first up, and I gave him the picture that I drew of him. I said, "Did you really draw this?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Oh, it's very good. Let me sign it." And he signed it. And I don't know what happened to it. I lost it, but that was a great moment for me. And I never realized how short he was.
He was short, like 5'7"?
No, I think it was 5'4", 5'5".
That's short.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that bothered him, you know.
Of course it did.
His height bothered him for his whole career. But I don't know why Alan Ladd was so upset about being short, because James Cagney was short, Edward G. Robinson was short, a lot of actors were short. But it bothered Alan Ladd terribly for his career. He had to always be either standing or sitting down when he was photographed with somebody.
Now, do you think his death was accidental or not? Because he seems troubled a bit.
I think he was so messed up at the time, I don't think he knew what he was taking.
Okay.
You know, I think it was accidental, but my gosh, when you think of how great he was in 1953 when he did Shane, and 11 years later he was an old man in movies. Didn't look good at the end. But that was only 11 years after Shane. He went downhill like, well, it was the liquor, really.
Liquor doesn't help. Okay, when you're still a young boy now, you're unemployed with Joan. Tell me the Joan Bennett gazebo. It's called a gazebo.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, well, I was doing amateur theater in Ottawa, and I'd done a lot of plays. And I wanted to be an actor, and this was before I did impressions. No, I think I was doing impressions, but I didn't take it seriously. But I did want to become an actor, and when Joan Bennett and Donald Woods came to Ottawa to do the gazebo, I was cast in it. I was going to play the guy that comes in to the house, and then he's shot and then wrapped up in a shower curtain and buried under the gazebo. And that was the part. And I was thrilled. I didn't have any lines or anything. I just had to walk into the house and call out a name and wander around and get shot. And all my friends were there, and everybody was there. And Donald Cook and Joan Bennett were really not in a good mood, because they didn't want to be doing the play anymore. They wanted to get back to Hollywood. They'd been on the road for 6 months, and they were just bored. And you could tell. And they didn't even come to rehearsal. And anyway, all my friends were in the audience, and I wandered into the house and, "Hello, anybody home?" And then he was supposed to shoot me. Well, the gun didn't work. And I could hear click, click, click. And I'm going, "Hello, anybody home?" Click, click, click. And then I hear, "God damn it. Jesus Christ. I can't believe these amateurs. They didn't even put blanks in the gun. Oh, God." And I could hear all this. And I'm still going, "Hello, hello." And finally I hear, bang. And I went, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh," and I wandered around this stage and fell into the shower curtain. And all my friends in the audience stood up and applauded. And Donald Cook was still on the corner going, "Damn it, hell, amateurs." And then when we did the curtain call, they had left. They didn't even come out for a curtain call. They got in their car and went to the airport. And I came out and I got a standing ovation.
How fun. So what year is that?
That was about, gosh, I'm trying to think. About 1960.
60. So for the next few years, you're performing in clubs. Are you doing that kind of stuff? What are you doing in the next few years?
I was doing a lot of club dates, a lot of television, still acting in amateur theater, and got into radio, was a disc jockey, and started to be fairly well known in Canada. And finally, two Canadian writers by the name of Frank Peppiatt and John Aylesworth really helped my career, because I was doing a lot of variety shows in Toronto, and these two guys were writing the shows, all the material, and they took a shine to me, and they wrote me some great stuff for a lot of Canadian variety shows. And they wrote me a nightclub act, as a matter of fact. And then these two guys, Frank Peppiatt and John Aylesworth, went to the States, and they did the Jimmy Dean show in New York. And because they knew me and wrote my act and everything, they got me on the Jimmy Dean show in New York. And that was my first television show. And then right after that, they left Jimmy Dean because they didn't like him, and they went to Hollywood to do the Judy Garland show. And then they got me on that. So I went from Jimmy Dean to Judy Garland.
Why didn't they like Jimmy Dean? He's a country guy. I know he is, but
they just thought he was a bit arrogant and,
okay.
and didn't socialize with them, and was kind of glum and a downer, and
Okay.
and they didn't think he was that talented, you know, and they just didn't like it. But they were thrilled to get asked to do the Judy Garland show, and because of their connection with me and Mel Torme, who at that time was a great friend of mine. I'd done a show with him in Toronto, and we became great friends. And with Frank Peppiatt and John Aylesworth and Mel Torme, that's how I got on the Garland show.
Okay, so tell me how you got on the show. I know she listened to some of your stuff, right?
Yeah, well, Mel Torme played a tape of all my impressions for her, and she didn't seem interested at all. And he kept saying, "You got to hear this guy. He does impressions that nobody else does." And she said, "Mel, I don't like impersonators. They make me fart." That's what Judy said. This little girl from Kansas said, "They make me fart." Do you believe that? Anyway, he said, "Well, just listen a little bit more." She didn't seem interested at all. I remember when I did my James Mason impression, she went, "Oh my God, play that again." So we backed it up, and she heard my James Mason, and she said, "That's incredible. I love James Mason. He's got him down to a T. Oh my God, play that again." Played it for the third time, and then she turned to Mel and said, "Book him on the show."
So how was the show?
And the show was great. And a couple of years later, I met James Mason and thanked him for getting me on the Judy Garland show. And he looked at me and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" And walked away.
It seemed like she had so much energy. I saw a clip with her and Ethel Merman and Barbra Streisand. It looked like Barbra Streisand couldn't even keep up with those two. Was she like that on stage?
She admired Barbra Streisand.
She did.
Oh, yeah. She knew that she was going to be one of the greats. Because, boy, she could sing, you know.
Yeah.
And Judy knew that. And they worked really well together because they both admired each other. And that's why they look good together.
Why didn't the show make it? It was only on for a year.
Yeah, and I could never figure out why the Judy Garland show wasn't in color.
Well, what you know more than me about everything, but my recollection is the Beatles come in February '64. Everything's black and white.
Yeah.
By May, it's color.
Well, remember Bonanza, which was opposite Judy Garland, that was in color. And
Right.
one of the reasons Bonanza Zanza was so popular was because it was in color. And nobody had ever seen color before, and so everybody tuned in. But Judy Garland, being a variety show, was in black and white.
Well, I don't know. But it was
Because
60
you're right, color just came in at that time.
Oh, a question I want to ask you is, okay, you're coming up right when the Beatle invasion, the English invasion hits. What are those guys like Mel Torme and Judy Garland, what did they think of these guys?
What did they what?
What did they think of the British invasion? What did they think of those guys from overseas? They give them much credit at all? I mean, because
I'm not sure about that. Mel Torme, sang the American Songbook,
yeah, of course.
and so he probably wouldn't be that interested in the Beatles at all, But he probably realized why they're so popular, But I never heard him mention them ever, and I knew Mel quite well.
But that says a lot that they did mention him, right?
Yeah.
So you come out right before that. You come out with 2 albums in '63, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the albums.
Well, 63. The first album I did was in Canada on the Prime Minister, John Diefenbaker, My Fellow Canadians. And it was a bestseller in Canada. And it was a spoof on the Prime Minister. And that did extremely well. And Capitol Records put it out. And of course it sold only in Canada because
Nobody.
the US wouldn't know who John Diefenbaker was. But the album did so well that Capitol Records were interested in me, and that's when I did A Christmas Carol. And I had, I can remember when I did A Christmas Carol, did the album, I did it in my room at home. And all the edits were in Scotch tape.
So you made it for almost nothing,
Huh?
correct? You made it for nothing.
Made it for nothing, did it in my room, put bed sheets on the wall to kind of make the sound better, and gave it to Capitol Records, and they dubbed it immediately before the Scotch tape started to pull apart. And there were about 200 edits in Scotch tape. Anyway, we put that album out, and it did really well, Christmas Carol. I had Jack Benny as Scrooge, which wasn't the best choice, except that Jack Benny was cheap. But Jack Benny liked children, so when I later did it with W.C. Fields, it was a better choice. But the original version that I did of A Christmas Carol, I had John Kennedy as the voice of Christmas Yet to Come. And I remember there was a line in the album where the voice of Christmas Yet to Come, John Kennedy said, "My life upon this earth is very brief, and you will be visited by 3 spirits." And when everybody heard that, and he'd just been shot, they thought, "Oh my God," so they took it out
They did.
and replaced it with Lloyd Bridges.
Okay.
But there are a few albums around, I've never found them, where John Kennedy was the voice of Christmas Past.
Did any of those guys? I mean, you joined the ranks a little later, but did the Sinatras or Martins? Did they ever talk about Kennedy ever to you?
Do they what?
Did they ever talk about Kennedy when you were around them?
Not really. Not really. When I got together with Frank, because sometimes when Frank would finish his show, he would hold court, and we'd meet in the lounge at the MGM, and all the celebrities would show up, and we'd talk movies, really, and tell jokes and stuff like that. I never heard anybody really get that political, But Frank was political. I mean, Frank was very interested in people with power. That's why he liked the presidents and the mafia. Anybody that had power interested him.
Tell me the Guys and Dolls story.
The what?
The Guys and Dolls. You guys were talking about movies.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was one of the sessions we had after Frank did his show, and we were at in the coffee shop at the MGM Grand, or in the lounge, actually. And Tony Bennett was there, and Steve Lawrence was there, and Vic Damone was there, and a couple other well-known singers. And Frank would hold court. He would tell stories. And I remember Tony Bennett was way in the back, and Frank was running down Guys and Dolls. He hated the movie, hated his part, thought Brando was terrible, couldn't understand why they'd made it,
Yeah.
thought that Dean Martin should have played Sky Masterson, and he was just running it down. And this little voice in the back, you couldn't even see who it was Tony Bennett. And Tony went, "Frank, I liked it. I really liked it. It's my favorite movie of all time." And Frank went, "Who the hell's that?" And Tony went, "It's me, Tony Bennett." "Tony, yeah, you know, Frank, it's my favorite movie." "Oh, God," says Frank, "you gotta be kidding. Why don't you go back to San Francisco and look for your heart?" He said, "That was the worst movie I've ever been in." "Well, I liked it. It really did. It's a classic." He said, "You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Get the hell out of here." You know, it was so funny to hear this little voice saying, "I liked it. I really liked it." So anyway, I ran into Tony Bennett like 40 years later in Vegas, and I reminded him of that incident. Remember the night we were all together and you kept saying you liked Guys and Dolls, and Frank got upset? You know what Tony said? "You know something, Rich? I hated it. It was a terrible movie." I said, "What?" "It was awful." I said, "Well, you didn't think so at the time." "I know, but I was just trying to suck up to Frank." I said, "Well, you didn't like it? It was awful." Like 40 years later, he admitted it was a terrible movie.
The songs are good.
Oh, the songs are great,
And I like the colors.
but it was badly cast.
Yeah. Isn't Gene Simmons in it, right?
Gene Simmons is
Yeah.
great. Yeah, Stubby Kaye,
Yeah.
and a few other good people, but Marlon Brando,
It's not right.
but Marlon Brando, you know, at that time could be in anything he wanted to be in. You know, he was so popular, so they put him in Guys and Dolls, but not one of his shining moments.
Did you ever meet him,
Who?
Brando?
No.
He was a different bird, wasn't he?
Oh, gosh. I don't think I wanted to meet Marlon Brando.
He was different.
He
I
was,
don't think the ending was so
He
nice.
was strange.
Yeah.
And he kept running down acting. Didn't think he should have been an actor, you know?
He had a hate complex, for sure. I don't understand. Okay, George Burns.
George Burns. Yeah. George was great. George was a sweet, lovable guy, and easy to talk to, and wonderful sense of humor. And
The phone call. The first phone call.
huh?
The first phone call. Did you ever the first time you ever called him?
Oh yeah. While I was doing all my impressions for Mel Torme to get me on the Garland Show, and when I finally got on the Judy Garland Show, Mel Torme was assigned to put together a routine for me. And with Frank Pepiot and John Aylesworth and Mel, they came up with me doing The Man That Got Away in different voices. And that's what I did on the show. And we were trying to pick out the different impressions I was going to do. And I went through about 5 or 6 of them. And then I did George Burns for him. And he had never heard my George Burns before. And he said, "Richmond, that's the best impression I think you do is George Burns." I said, "Oh, thank you, Mel. God, I haven't heard you do that." And I said, "Well, you know, I like George, and it's one of my favorites." "Has he ever heard it?" I said, "No, I don't think so." "Oh my God," he said, "we got to get George on the phone. You got to do it for him." And I said, "What?" He said, let's phone up George Burns and you can do it for him. I said, wait a minute, hold on, Mel. What am I going to say? He said, Richmond, he always called me Richmond. Richmond, you're clever. You'll think of something. And I said, well, give me a second, will you? And he didn't. He dialed the number and got George immediately on the phone. And so I was so damn nervous. I picked up the phone and I said, hello, George. This is Rich Little. I've just come down from Canada to do the Judy Garland show. And I do an impression of you, and I thought I'd phone you up and do it for you. And George said, gee, that's great. I'd love to hear it sometime, kid, and hung up.
That's funny.
And I reminded him of that years later. And you know what he said? Well, I knew it wasn't me because I was on the other end of the phone.
He was sharp.
Oh, he was sharp. He was very
I wish
sharp.
I could have met
right
him.
up until he passed away, he was still sharp.
Did he talk about the old days, like the Al Jolsons?
Yes, he did.
What did he say about Jolson? Because Jolson's supposed to be beyond great.
He said Jolson was a tremendous talent and very popular but difficult to get along with. He said because he had such a huge ego. But he recognized his talent. I remember George one time did talk about, you know, Jolson and Georgie Jessel and Sophie Tucker and all those wonderful people from the 20s and 30s. And he had great admiration for a lot of them, you know. But it was amazing to hear George talk about people that you had to be a movie buff to know even who they were, you know, because he had such a long history in show business.
That vaudevillian in music hall must have been amazing.
Oh yeah,
It must have been.
vaudeville. Yeah,
And the music hall over in England, it must have been amazing.
yeah.
With Chaplin and those guys.
And you don't realize until you see some of the old movies what a good dancer George Burns was. I saw him in a couple of movies where he was no Fred Astaire, but he was pretty good.
Did you meet Fred Astaire?
Huh?
Did you ever meet Fred Astaire?
Never met Fred Astaire. No, that's one I missed. I'd love to have had a picture with him.
Yeah, he was.
He was one of the great talents of all time.
He's
Fred
special.
Astaire.
Yeah.
My God, when you think of the rehearsals that he had for all his numbers, it must have been incredible how many times he must have done it, you know?
He's no Dean
He
Martin.
was a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So it had to be perfect, you know?
Well, it's like with your, I would assume with your impressions, you do it over and over and over and over again until you get it right.
Yeah.
Jack Benny.
Jack Benny. Well, a lot of people think that I'm cheap, but I'm not. Actually, Jack Benny was one of the most generous people that you ever wanted to meet. He was probably one of the nicest people I've ever known in show business, was Jack Benny. He had no airs, very little ego, easy to talk to, very humble, and just an all-around good guy, you know. And we had a great relationship. He used to come and see me perform, I just thought he was the best.
You met him on the Steve Allen show, right?
I met him on the Steve Allen show, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, I didn't know he was in the audience. And when I did the Steve Allen show, which was one of the first shows I ever did, I did my Jack Benny. And as I'm doing it, I heard a voice from the back of the theater going, "That's terrible. That's not me." I thought, who the hell is that? And it was Jack. And he came up on stage and he said, "Rich, first of all, you do me going like this, but you use 4 fingers and I use 3. See? And anybody knows that 3 is funnier than 4.
Now, did Steve had that worked out with him, or did he just show up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve put Jack Benny in the back of the room to do that when I did him. And the same thing happened on the Dinah Shore show when I did Johnny Carson years later. they had it all worked out that I was going to do Johnny Carson, and then Carson was going to come out.
You know, what was Benny's favorite impression of yours?
Whose?
Jack Benny's favorite impression of yours?
Oh, Spiro Agnew.
I don't remember what he sounded like. Spiro Agnew.
Spiro Agnew. He loved my Spiro. I guess he must have been a close friend of Spiro Agnew's. And when I did him on the Tonight Show, he just slapped his knee and said, "Oh my God, that's perfect." And I remember Spiro. You don't remember what he sounded like?
I know what he looks like. I even
Spiro
I
Agnew.
bought a watch. He just watched.
Let me give you a little background of myself and clarify the discrepancies promulgated by those who clear their minds of the pernicious influence of the national masochism encouraged by an effete corps of impudent snobs. Which meant nothing. I don't know what the hell that means. But that was Spiro Agnew. He used big words.
I remember seeing him at Nixon's funeral. You haven't seen him in a long time, and he showed up. That's when I remember seeing him then in 90, whenever Nixon died, 91? Something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Jack Benny, I think, is wonderful. Tell me more about Benny, like when he was on the toilet. Remember that one story you had?
The what?
When he was on the toilet at the Palmer House. You were at the.
Oh, yeah. I was at the Palmer House doing that's in Chicago, performing for an audience. And Jack Benny was doing a special show on the second floor. And when I showed up for rehearsal, they said, "Jack Benny's here, he's doing a show upstairs." I said, "Really? Oh, I love Jack. Haven't seen him in a long time. Where is he?" And they said, "I don't know. He's around somewhere." So I started to look for him. And I went up to the second floor, and hopefully I could catch Jack rehearsing or whatever, and nobody could find him. And I looked everywhere, and they said, "No, he was here about 10 minutes ago." And I looked in every room, and then finally I heard a violin. And I went, "Where's that coming from?" "It's coming from the washroom." So I went into the men's washroom, and I could hear this violin. I couldn't see Jack. And I pushed open one of the stalls, and Jack was sitting on the toilet playing his violin. And I said, "Jack, what the heck are you doing practicing in the washroom on the toilet?" He said, "Rich, this is the only place at home that I can rehearse, play my violin, because Mary can't stand my playing the violin, so I usually play it in the toilet. So I'm used to playing it in the toilet." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then I started to leave, and he said, "Rich, would you kick open the other stalls and see if I got a standing ovation?"
He's great. You know what I just bought recently is all his radio shows are on CD. I think there was 300 you could buy it. I bought it.
Really?
And it's all just the radio shows, and it's wonderful. I'll look into it. It wasn't expensive. It was like $20.
Really?
Oh, it's
The
wonderful.
radio shows are even better than the TV shows, weren't
Well,
they?
you'd have to listen. When he opened the door, when that World War I guy was in there, all that stuff in the vault. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
One more thing about him, the cup of soup story, the soup.
Oh, yeah. Well, when we did the Tonight Show, I was hosting it and Jack Benny was a guest. And he said to me, "Rich, I'm a big fan of yours, but the only reason I did the show tonight is because I knew it would be taped at NBC. And they've got a coffee shop there that has the greatest soup I've ever tasted. Chicken noodle soup. It's terrific. So that's why I did the show." I said, "Really? Because of the soup?" "Well," he said, I like you and everything, but when I found out it was going to be at NBC and they had that great chicken soup, I decided to do the show. And then when the show was over, we walked down to the coffee shop to get a couple of cups of soup for Jack, and it was locked up. There was nobody there. And Jack couldn't believe it. And he's banging on the door. I only did this show because of the chicken soup. And there was nobody in there. And he kept banging on the door. And finally, some guy that was sweeping the place opened the door. He said, "Where's the soup?" And the guy went, "What are you talking about?" And he went back into the kitchen and opened up the freezer and got some of the chicken soup out of there and put it in the microwave and heated it up. And then put it in a couple of cups, gave me a cup, and then we started to walk back to where we did the Carson show. And on the way back, we passed where Lucille Ball was shooting her TV show, you know, I Love Lucy. And Jack said, "Wait a minute, I've got it. Have you got it? Let me have your soup." And I gave it to him. "I'm going to give this to Lucy." And he walked right in the middle of their shooting. They were in the middle of a scene. And he walked right over and said, "Lucy, you got to try this chicken soup." And she looked at him like he was nuts, right? And she said, "I don't like chicken noodle soup." "Well, just try it, you know." And she took a little sip. She said, "Okay, that's pretty good." And then Jack wandered through the audience and had people tasting the soup. You know, I thought they'd leave that in the show, but they didn't. But I thought they were going to leave that in the I Love Lucy show. It was so funny to see Jack wandering in, you know, giving everybody a taste of his soup.
It just seems like all these guys are so comfortable with themselves. I'm saying the same thing. They just seem so themselves. He's Jack Benny, right?
Yeah, Jack was always Jack Benny, you know.
Yeah.
He used to say to me, "You know, I love performing at the Palmer House in Chicago because the towels are so fluffy." I said, "What?" He said, "They've got the greatest towels." And I said, "Is that why you play the Palmer House?" He said, "Well, one of the reasons are, gosh, the towels are, you know, they're so fluffy and so great, I can hardly get them in my suitcase."
That's fabulous, isn't it? That's comedy. He's wonderful. Really, he's a special man.
Oh yeah, special man in my life was Jack Benny.
Yeah,
I would say he's up there with Jimmy Stewart and some of the others I really liked.
Okay, Jimmy Stewart. Let's talk. How'd you meet Jimmy Stewart?
Let's see. The first time I met Jimmy Stewart, I can't remember the first time I met him, but we did a lot of TV shows together. I think I was doing a benefit with him. I was one of the people on the show. And he just was so nice to me and loved it when I imitated him. He used to say to me, "Reg, boy, I wish I'd known you back in the 30s and 40s, because you do me so great. You could have dubbed a lot of my movies." I said, "What?" Yeah. I hate dubbing for films. Then you could dub for me, and then I'd go on to make another movie. And then I remember he said to me, "You know, Rich, I talk so slow that one time I found out halfway through making a movie that they'd already finished the sequel." Which is funny.
Imagine though, these guys are stars, movie stars, and they go off and fight in the war. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It's shocking to me that he's one of the biggest stars around. He fights in the second one, like Clark Gable and some of the other guys.
Clark Gable was, great in the war too. Yeah, a lot of them were.
It's shocking.
Yeah, they were such big stars. And it's a wonder that Jimmy Stewart came out of the war, because he had so many missions over Germany where planes were shot down. And I think his plane was shot at many times, but he got through the war. It's amazing he got through the war. I think he had like over 20 flights over Germany, you know, which is a lot.
He's an American hero.
Oh, definitely American hero. Yeah.
To get off the subject for a second, I have to tell you, but years ago I interviewed Joe Foss. Do you remember Joe Foss or not?
No.
He's the most decorated pilot of the Second World War. He He was the governor of South Dakota after the war. If you don't know who he is, but they're special men, these guys. What did I want to talk about next? Cary Grant. Do your Cary Grant.
Oh, yeah, it's Cary Grant. Well, Cary was, I think he's one of, if he's not the greatest star of his era, he's one of them. You know, he was perfect. Cary Grant, every movie made in a movie was perfect, you know. He had everything planned out too. Somebody told me that when he did a movie, he had to rehearse and make everything perfect, you know. And he was a perfectionist, and very nice man, and loved show business. He used to come and see me perform at the Sands Hotel in Vegas all the time, and he would laugh and chuckle. And actually, when he would start laughing, I'd say to myself, "Wait a minute, that isn't Cary Grant. Cary Grant doesn't giggle," but he would giggle and laugh, and he was just a wonderful guy that loved show business and loved entertainers, and he was very special.
I wish he kept making movies, because I know Father Goose didn't do well, but I like Father Goose. You ever seen Father Goose?
Yeah, Father Goose is good.
And even Walk, Don't Run, when he's in the Olympics, remember?
Yeah.
That's a fine movie. He could have kept
Well, I
making.
don't think that Cary wanted to be a character actor for too long, because, you know, he was so good looking and so charming. I don't think he wanted the public to see him later in life older, you know. Didn't bother Jimmy Stewart, though, you know. But I think Cary Grant had bothered him because he was such a matinee idol, and I don't think he wanted the people seeing him really older. So by the time he made Walk, Don't Run, that was his last movie he made, he figured that was it. You know, I can no longer get the girl. I'm too old for that, so he quit.
There's a documentary that came out probably 4 or 5 years ago that have audio tapes talking about that, where he used to have black hair and now he's got gray hair, and he talks. They're like home audio tapes.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen it or not.
No.
You should see that. Burt Lancaster.
Burt Lancaster. Well, I only met Burt a couple of times. Once on a plane, and I sat next to him and asked him a lot of questions, and telling me about his career and parts he turned down and movies he didn't make and stuff like that. And he was very nice. And then I met him when he was making that movie in Atlantic City. What was the name of it? I think it was called Atlantic City. And I was performing in Atlantic City at the time. And I get up at 6 in the morning and go out on the boardwalk and watch Burt Lancaster do a couple of scenes on the boardwalk. And we'd talk and then have lunch together, and very nice man. And he said to me, "I don't know why I'm still making movies. I'm freezing my ass off here. I've got enough money and I don't know why I'm doing it. I guess because I love to act."
That's great. He's a special guy too. We don't have these guys anymore.
I think he was one of the greats, Burt Lancaster. If you look at actors of the 40s and look at their overall career, you know, you'd have to rate Gregory Peck and Burt Lancaster as two of the all-time greats. If you looked at their movies, they didn't have many clinkers.
They're all good.
Well, they're not all good.
Most of them are good.
One time I was playing tennis with Gregory Peck. We were playing tennis together, and I'm not that great a tennis player, and he was beating me. So what I do is, just as I hit the ball back to him, I would yell out the name of a movie that was a stinker, right? He'd hit the ball over and I'd go, "McKenna's Gold," and then I'd hit the ball and he'd miss it. You know, "Beloved Infidel," whack, he'd miss it. But if I'd said, you know, "To Kill a Mockingbird," that ball would come right zigging past me.
But he made movies into the end that were good. What's it called? The Boys from Brazil is great.
Oh yeah, where he played a German.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like kind of a Mengele kind of guy,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, he had a fabulous
Oh,
career.
he was great.
I liked Gregory Peckus. They said he didn't have much humor, you know. But the times I was with him, he was kind of funny.
Okay, you were at a party at Edward G. Robinson's house. Let's hear about the party.
Oh, yeah. I'm at a party for Jim Backus
Oh,
in Hollywood. And and I forget what the event was. I think it was Edward G. Robinson's birthday. And it was full of people. And I was wandering around, and they said, "You must meet Edward G. Robinson, Rich." And I said, "Oh, I'd love to." So I went over to him, but there was so much noise from all the people there that you could hardly hear. And then everybody said, "Do him for him. There he is. Do the impression." And I was embarrassed. I went, "Oh my God, I don't want to do it in front of him." And everybody kept clapping and everything. And then I realized, how can I do Edward G. Robinson? There's so much noise. And then I realized he doesn't hear very well. He's almost deaf. So this is going to be pointless. And he looked up at me and went, "Let me hear the impression. Let me hear it, kid." And I did it in front of him, and I didn't say anything. I just went like this. I didn't say anything because I knew nobody could hear. And then when I finished, and I didn't say anything, he went like this. Like it was perfect. And nobody heard anything.
he was. You know what I learned about him recently is he tried to be in the Planet of the Apes.
You what?
He auditioned for the Planet of the Apes. Isn't that funny?
That's right, yeah.
Isn't that? He's still trying till the end.
Yeah, Soylent Green, I think, was one of
His last movie
movies.
with Heston.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heston was a special guy too. Did you get to meet Heston?
Yeah, I did meet Heston a few times.
Heston was one of my.
I did an impression of Heston on The Tonight Show. And I look at it today, and it sounds pretty good.
Oh, do
Not
it.
bad.
Do it for me right now, can you?
Charlton Heston. I forget.
That's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I forget what I said, but I did a little scene from Ben-Hur, and he loved it. But I can't remember what I said.
I think I interviewed him years ago, one of my first interviews, and I asked him a bunch of questions, similar questions to what I'm asking you. And then when it was about 20 minutes, people were asking him questions. All of a sudden, everyone left. I said he was at a book signing. It was the re-release of that Orson Welles movie, and I can't think of it, when he's a cop, and Heston is a Mexican. Oh, what the hell's the name of the movie? Touch of Evil.
Touch of Evil, yeah.
And I said, "Do you mind me asking you more questions?" He goes, "I can do two things at once." I asked him 15 more questions, and I could go on and on, but every time I met him, he was wonderful. Every time. He was a great guy. Glenn Ford, I didn't know he was so kind of quirky.
Glenn Ford was a great actor.
Great.
He was one of the best, and made a lot of great movies, a lot of great westerns. I was a big fan of his. And then he did my television show, my variety show. I was thrilled to have him on, but he was a little strange on the show. He was nice, and wrote me a lovely note after the show aired, which I treasure. But as I said, he was a little strange because he kept saying to me before we taped the show, because my variety show was done in a very small studio, and the audience was very close to the stage, and not many people. And Glenn came to me like about 20 minutes before the taping and said, "Rich, how close is the audience going to be to me when I'm on stage?" And I said, "What? How close will the audience be?" I said, "Well, I don't know. The people will be in the front row, I guess. I don't know, about 2 or 3 feet. I've got to find out." I said, "You do?" I've got to find out how close the audience is to me on the stage. And I said, okay. So he got a tape measure, and he taped from where he was going to be standing on the stage to where the first row was. And then he wrote it down, how far it was. It was like 3.5 feet or something. And then that was important to him, and I couldn't figure that out. Why would he do that?
Was he just obsessing about that because he was nervous, maybe?
I don't know. But to know the exact feet of how close the audience was, what would that mean? Never figured that out. And I remember seeing him with a tape measure, taping from the first chair to the middle of the stage. And then another time, I did a Georgie Jessel roast. Georgie Jessel did the first roast before Dean Martin. They were half-hour syndicated shows, and he paid tribute. Well, they were roasts really, but they were tributes in a way. But he did a number of them, and Georgie Jessel did, and I did a couple. I did one for Bing Crosby and one for Glenn Ford. And I remember they had a comic on by the name of Joey Villa. And his routine was, because Glenn Ford had made a lot of Westerns, he did a routine with the Indians. And Glenn was the cavalry officer. And it was a very funny sketch. And he was doing it at rehearsal. And Glenn was in the back of the theater, just watching. And he stormed up on stage and said, "This will not happen on my show. He's doing a routine with the Indians and putting those wonderful people down." And Joey Villa said, "No, I'm not putting them down. It's just comedy. You are degrading those wonderful people." And the producer of the show said, "Glenn, it's just a comedy routine. It's funny. I will not permit him to do that and degrade the Indians. He's off the show." And everybody went, "He's off the show?" And then the director said, "Well, Glenn, I don't know why you're so upset, because, my gosh, when you made Westerns, you shot a lot of Indians." And Glenn thought for a minute, and you know what he said? "That's true. That is, but I use blanks."
So he's wound tight. He's just wound up, right?
"Yeah, but I use blanks." Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Like he was going to use real bullets. So everybody just screamed at that, but they didn't want to laugh in front of him. Yeah. So everybody wandered off and started laughing in the corners.
Another guy I didn't know much. I like him, but I didn't know that much about him. Was Stuart Granger. You were friends with him?
Oh yeah, I was a big friend of Stuart Granger's in the latter part of his life. He lived in Palos Verdes alone. And if you went to his apartment or his condo, he had all these heads of animals all over the place.
So he's a hunter.
He was a hunter, yeah. And I just was such a big fan of his, because I think that, Scaramouche is one of the great adventure movies of all time.
He's great.
And other movies, the first one he made was
Solomon Mines and all that?
King Solomon's Mines.
Yeah, he's great.
Those are probably his two best. But anyway, he made a lot of great movies. I was a huge fan. And because I was a huge fan, my wife, Jeannie at the time, thought up a kind of a gag they were going to throw on me. I was going to have a birthday party at some local restaurant, and she was going to get Stuart Granger to be the maitre d', or the waiter, and serve the food, to take her orders, and to see what reaction I'd get. But it never came about, but that would have been. Could you imagine sitting there and the waiter comes over and it's Stuart Granger?
And you said he was difficult too.
Well, he was difficult. He had a good heart, but he was full of himself and very pompous, and A lot of people couldn't take him. But I knew that about him, and I became great friends with him, even though he put a lot of people down and ruffled a lot of feathers. And, you know, my wife, for instance, Jeannie at the time, couldn't stand him and never went with me. And because of his language and putting people down and everything. But I liked him. I really did. Even though he was difficult.
He was going to be in Ben-Hur.
Huh?
I didn't know he was going to be in Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah, they wanted him to play Marcellus and Ben-Hur. William Wilder did. But he hummed and hawed because he wanted to be the star. He wanted to play Ben-Hur. And they said, no, but when you play Marcellus, that's a better part. And, but he didn't buy it. Because he said, who's the star? They said, Charlton Heston. And Granger said, Charlton Heston, he's boring. He has only one expression. I can't stand him. So he turned it down. And then his friends talked him into doing it. He said, it's going to be a great movie, Jim. You're making a big mistake. So he phoned up William Wilder and said, okay, I'll play it. He said, sorry, I've already booked Stephen Boyd to play the part.
It was, he screwed up.
But you know, Granger would have been better than Stephen Boyd.
For sure.
Because Granger had kind of a Roman face, you know, and he would have been better as a Roman.
No, he
It would have been a great part for him.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. But he, you know, by the time he made up his mind, it was too late. He regretted that terribly.
Because a lot of people today don't remember him so much.
No. In my book that I wrote, he's one of the people that a lot of people don't know. And it's interesting because Granger made a lot of movies. Came along King Solomon's Mines in the 50s. He was a big star in England, huge star in England. Made a lot of great movies in England. As a matter of fact, when I went to England to do Copycats, a show I did over there, I got all his movies and had them converted into the English format. And I brought them all back and gave them to him. I gave him 12 movies. And he was so grateful you couldn't believe it, that I did that. And anyway, he came to America to do King Solomon's Mines, and then he had about 10 years of success and made Scaramouche and made some other movies, but nothing of the high quality of Scaramouche. And today he's hardly remembered.
But even his small movies like was he in North to Alaska?
Yep.
He's good in that too. He just has
very good in that movie.
Yeah, no, it's a classic. No, but it's John Wayne movie. It's a good movie. It's not a great movie, but he's.
You know, it's a fun movie though, isn't it?
Of course.
Ernie Kovacs was in it. Yeah.
Oh, do you ever meet Ernie Kovacs?
No.
He was a
never.
special man too.
Yeah. There's another person that nobody remembers.
Nobody remembers. He's in another movie with Kim Novak, and I can't. Bell Hook and what's it called? He's looking for witches, and they're witches. I can't think of it. Ernie Kovacs is hunting witches, and Kim Novak is a witch.
Oh, Bell Book and Candle?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
He's in that too.
Yeah, he is, yeah.
He's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't make many movies, though.
I learned something when I read your book. Bing Crosby had 41 number one hits.
Yeah.
Jesus, that's a lot.
Bing Crosby, you know, people talk who the greats of all time were. Was it Elvis? Was it the Beatles? You know, and everything. But was it Sinatra? You know. But Bing Crosby was the greatest singer of them all because he had more hits than anybody else. And still, White Christmas is still the biggest seller of all time.
And he's a.
And you know, the interesting thing about Bing is, when you think about it, back in the 40s, in the early 40s, before radio became that big, Bing Crosby put out a record every week.
Really?
And if you wandered through the neighborhood of cities, you could hear the same record being played at every second or third house, over and over and over. That's all he did. And then the next week he'd come up with another record, and they'd be playing that throughout the whole neighborhood. So he had a hit record every week. Though that's why he had so many hits.
I think that boy's book, Gary Crosby's book, really screwed him. It gave people.
Yeah. Well, that was a book that was not authorized by anybody. Even Gary didn't know what was in it.
Oh, really?
Not really, no.
He was a mess, Gary.
Gary was a mess,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, he really was.
I mean,
He doesn't even remember what's in the book. Or didn't.
Did you meet Crosby in the 60s or 70s?
I met him in the 70s.
Okay.
He did my TV show. And he was wonderful. He was great. But I remember the executives at NBC, when I was doing my TV show, and I said, Bing's going to do my show. And I was so excited. And the executives at NBC said, oh, no, he can't do the show. We got Starsky and Hutch on that week. I said, what? You're comparing Starsky and Hutch with Bing Crosby? And they said, well, Starsky and Hutch are big on TV. What the hell has Bing Crosby done? Can you believe that?
It
I
sounds
had
like
to convince them to put him on the show. They didn't want him.
he's another one that's just great. Those road movies are wonderful.
The what?
Those road movies are great.
Yeah, they're fun. Aren't
They're
they?
really fun. I mean, he's
Bing was the total opposite to Sinatra. Bing was very laid back, wasn't flamboyant, didn't have much of an ego, and Frank was, Mr. Sinatra was Mr. Go-It-All, and they were two different personalities, but they both admired each other greatly. And I think if you watch High Society, that Well Did You Ever song is one of the greatest numbers ever on film, ever photographed in a movie.
I love the colors. Those colors are so sharp, aren't they? No, he's very special. I just think people forget about him because of that book, and it's been 50 years since he passed. Almost.
Yeah, they think he's a child beater.
Yeah.
Bing, which he never was. Well, he disciplined his kids. He was strict, but he never beat anybody. And he got a bum rap on that.
And he could make money out of anything, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You remember that? He sold orange juice at the end of his career.
But did he buy that as like a tax loss and then it started making money or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were on Sullivan, and Ed Sullivan was a big, big deal.
Yes, Ed Sullivan was a very important show for anybody to be on because everybody watched the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night. So if you were on Ed Sullivan and you did well and you were on it maybe one or two more times, you were a household name just from doing the Ed Sullivan Show. It was that powerful, but Ed was a strange man, he really was. He had no sense of humor, he had no charisma, and no charm at all. And when you think about it, all he did was point at the axe. And he could hardly talk because he couldn't even read the cue cards, He had to have cue cards for everything, The cue card guy, I felt so sorry for him. Before we do the show, the cue card guy would bring the cue cards up, and he'd have to have 3 people to carry them. There must have been 300 cards. And the letters were printed about a foot high, so you only get about 3 words on a card. And he struggled, there's so many goofs that Ed did. It was unbelievable. Remember when he had the flying nun on, and she sang a song called Dominique, and Ed came out after she finished her number. She sat on a stool with a guitar and she sang Dominique. And then Ed came out and said, wasn't she wonderful? For her performance tonight on our show, we're going to give her a Jew. And then he went, I'm sorry, a Jeep. And everybody went, a Jew? That's what he said. He read it wrong. Could you imagine?
And what did he call you when he introduced you?
He called me Little Richard.
Silly.
Yeah, he introduced me as Little Richard. Now we've got a young comic who is coming to us from beautiful downtown Canada. let's have a wonderful round of reception for Little Richard. That's the way I was introduced. First time I did the Ed Sullivan Show, as Little Richard. I remember stumbling out on stage in total disbelief. I looked like a deer caught in the headlights. And then I realized that if I bombed on the show, they wouldn't blame me, they'd blame Little Richard. So I got a little confidence back and finished my routine. And then Ed felt bad about the way they introduced me, and he said, you know, they wrote your name wrong on the card. He said, I'm very sorry that I screwed that up, Tiny. I said, no, it's not Tiny Little, Ed, it's Rich Little. You know who you are. I said, yes, but apparently you don't, Ed. Now don't get smart with me. Anyway, he felt so bad that he screwed up that he booked me the following week, so I got 2 shots on the Ed Sullivan Show.
You know what? That'd be a great movie. The Ed Sullivan, a movie about him, because people don't know that he's out there.
Yeah,
You know? It's like that Colonel Parker movie that came out about Elvis.
yeah.
People don't realize how out there Colonel Parker was, that he was an illegal immigrant and all that stuff. Ed Sullivan would be a great movie. Because all the big time people like yourself were on it and made him a break. Like, look at Jackie Mason. He didn't work for a long time.
They've never done a movie on Ed Sullivan, have they?
Yeah, you should do it.
Well, maybe nobody remembers him, I don't know.
But you have to. You have to.
It'd be interesting. Well, Will Jordan was the guy that made him famous with his impression. He did the best impression of Ed, Will Jordan, because he looked like him. And I did him, John Biner did him, Jackie Mason did him. A lot of people did Ed Sullivan. Matter of fact, the best impressions I think of Ed Sullivan were Will Jordan, John Biner, maybe myself. Ed was the worst. He didn't do himself well at all.
And you saw him at the end and he didn't recognize you.
That's right. I was crossing the street in New York. And, because he was so used to reading cue cards that I said, hello, Mr. Sullivan. How are you, sir? And he looked up and he said, don't walk. And I realized he was looking at the sign.
Now,
But that's the last time I saw him.
that's sad, I think.
Very sad.
Very sad. It's very sad. That's why the pathos is in there with the movie. I think that could be a special movie. Okay, I don't think Paul Lynde liked you.
No, Paul Lynde hated my impression.
But did he not like a lot of people? It seems like he didn't like a lot of people.
Well, he was a very sour-faced guy. Sour-faced guy. Paul Lynde was unfortunately a heavy drinker. I mean, he could drink. And they taped 3 episodes of Hollywood Squares, and then we'd break for dinner, and then do 2 more after dinner. Well, by the time we got around to doing the last 2, Paul was smashed. And they had to tie him into the square so he wouldn't fall out. And he still was funny. Even though he was totally plastered, he still was funny.
Do your Paul Lynde imitation.
Oh, God. Well, every time I'd imitate him on Hollywood Squares, he'd look into the camera and go, "Who's he doing? Who's that? Oh, that's disgusting. Get a day job." He hated it. Absolutely hated my impression. "I think your brother does me better than you do." And my brother did a terrible Paul Lynde. But he was popular,
Oh,
but he
yes.
hated doing the show, Paul Lynde wanted to be a leading man on television, and he wasn't. He was the second banana. And he was so popular on Hollywood Squares. But he grew to not like to do it.
He was great on Bewitched.
Yeah.
He was great
He
on.
was Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, yeah.
He was great in Bye Bye Birdie.
Yeah.
He was.
But boy, he was larger than life, wasn't he?
Yeah. What did he say to you when you were doing your show on stage? What would he say to you sometimes? This is funny.
Well, he'd sometimes come and see me and sit in the front row. And then right in the middle of my act, he'd say, "Do Godzilla. We want to hear God say." And I'd say, "What? Do Godzilla." And I thought, oh, God, you've got
That's
to
funny.
you know. And then I remember one time that Glenn Campbell was doing a show at the Hilton. And if you've ever seen Glenn Campbell's show, he opens with a song, then he brings his brother out and he sings with him. Then he brings his father out, and father and the brother sing with him. And then his mother out. His mother and his father and his brother sing with him. And then he introduced Paul Lynde on the front row. And Paul got a big round of applause. And Glenn went over to him and said, "Oh my God, you're so popular. Did you ever think of putting an act together and performing here at the Hilton?" And Paul looked up and said, "I can't. My parents are dead."
He's so funny. Okay, how about Carson didn't like your imitating, did he?
No, I don't think so, no. Although he faked it. See, Ed Sullivan faked it. Ed never liked people imitating him. He hated it. But he used to go along with it because people would be watching him, you know, and seeing if he thought it was funny, and then he looked good, you know. But Ed never liked it, and Paul Lynde certainly didn't like it, and some people just don't like to hear themselves imitated.
They must be thin-skinned, right?
I guess, yeah.
And you never found out why you didn't do the Carson show anymore?
No, I never found out the real reason. No. I went down there a few times to find out why they weren't booking me, but they always used to say to me things like, "Oh, we don't put impersonators on the show anymore," which wasn't true. But then I found out there were a lot of no books on the Carson show. Mel Torme was one.
Why?
I don't know. They must have said something, done something you might not even be aware of, and they were a no book. Maybe one time I said something that Johnny didn't like, or maybe Fred de Cordova, the director, didn't like. You know, you don't know. Maybe somebody said something about me, and all of a sudden I was a no book.
How about
And
Charlie?
I never found out why.
What's his name? Charlie Callis? He used to live here? Charlie, isn't it Callis? Charlie Callis?
Yeah.
Is that his name?
Yeah,
He was banned too, wasn't he?
probably, yeah.
But he pushed him or something, I think. He pushed him off his chair once, I think, for a bit.
Oh, I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
Tell me about him, because he seemed...
Who?
Charlie Callis. Is I saying it right or not?
Charlie Callis.
Yeah, okay.
If you're going to do an impersonation of Charlie Callis, you'd do... He made faces and
Yeah.
he was goofy. But he was a wonderful guy, you know. Sinatra loved him.
He lived
just-
here, right?
Huh?
He lived in Vegas.
He lived in Vegas, yeah. Yep. But Frank just adored him. And then on the roast, he was hysterical. When he'd come out as his drill instructor or his teacher or whatever it was, you know.
Let's talk about the roasts. You did a bunch of them, a couple dozen, right?
Yeah, I did 24 Dean Martin roasts. I did more roasts than anybody
Why did they use you so much?
because I could imitate a lot of people on the dais. And they knew that if I did them on the show, it was going to get a reaction, not only from the audience, but from the people I was imitating. So if there were about 3 or 4 people on the dais that I could imitate, they would book me on the show.
Did you like doing the show? Was it a fun show to do?
It was a great show to do, but it was a lot of pressure. Because not only was it a popular show with a big audience, but you were performing in front of some of the greats of Hollywood. You know, some of the greatest comedians and actors of all time were sitting on the dais. So you had to stand up in front of them and try and be funny in front of Jack Benny and George Burns and Jimmy Stewart and Orson Welles and Lucille Ball. I mean, there was a lot of pressure there, a lot of pressure. There were a few people on the roast, they were cut out of the show because they were so nervous they couldn't talk. I remember there was some comic on one night, he got up and he just looked down at the dais and started mumbling.
Really?
Yeah.
A lot of
And
pressure.
It was terrible, you know. Of course, if he was performing today, you could say he was doing his Joe Biden, but back in those days, it's just embarrassing.
So you like doing it. How was Dean on the show? It just seemed
Dean
like...
was great on the show. Dean was wonderful on the show. Well, although, I put this in my book, we would always meet before doing the show in the green room. And the green room was great because all the people on the dais were in there having coffee and cookies and whatever. And they were all chatting and, it was just wonderful in the green room. And then we'd go from the green room to the stage, which was about 20 feet away, and then tape the show. And we'd all be talking and laughing and having coffee and everything. And then Dean would stick his head in and say, "Hey, how are you, Pally?" And that would be about it. And then we'd head to the dais to do the show. And I remember one time we were all walking from the green room to the set. And as we were walking, Dean turned to me, I was next to him, and said, Who are we honoring tonight?" I said, "What? Who is the guest of honor, Rich?" I said, "You don't know?" "No, nobody's told me," which I didn't believe. And I said, "It's Michael Landon." "Oh, that's a good choice. Yeah, I like him. We're going to have some fun." And then we'd go and do the show. But I thought to myself, you mean to tell me that we're walking and we're about 30 seconds from doing the show and he doesn't know who they're honoring? And that was the kind of guy Dean was. He didn't care. Nobody told me. Do you believe that?
It could be a little bit of a bit, too.
Maybe he did it for effect.
Yeah. Because he couldn't be drunk all the time either. That was a bit, too. So
I said to him, "You didn't know who we were honoring?" He said, "No, but once we started the show and I saw the cue cards, I'd probably figure it out."
Now, I told you, one of my big first interviews, I interviewed Rickles, and he was very nice to me. I've taken pictures of him about probably 10 times because I worked at the casinos around Phoenix, and he used to do those a lot. I really think he was a great man.
He was the funniest man I've
And tell me about Don
ever
Rickles.
seen in my life.
He was so on.
Don Rickles, I can remember many nights on the roast where I had tears streaming down my face. I was laughing so hard. Don was incredible. He was so quick. He was so fast. And I remember the last time I ever saw Don Rickles, near the end of his life, a couple of months before he passed away. And I went to see him at the Orleans, and he couldn't move. He was sitting in a chair, couldn't walk. And he was a little out to lunch, but he still was funny, And I went backstage to see him, and he said, "Rich, come over here a second. I want to talk to you very privately." And I thought to myself, what the hell is this? Come over here. So I pulled up a chair and I went over to him and I said, "What is it, Don?" He said, "You know something? I like what you're doing with your hair." I said, "What?" I like the way you're combing your hair." I said, "You do?" "Yeah, your hair looks great." And I said, "Really? Well, your hair looks good too, Don. Don't be smart. But I just wanted to congratulate you on the way you combed your hair." That was the last thing I ever said to Don. Could you imagine him saying that to me?
I really liked him. The only thing I took pictures of many, many times. One time he had said, "I like you, you're fast, you don't F around." He just didn't say that, but the real thing. And he was always nice. The only time he said something to me was, he was in a wheelchair once. I took a picture. He goes, "If you don't mind, please erase that."
Please what?
Erase that, delete that picture. And I said, "Okay, I'm sorry." I didn't think it bothered him, but it bothered him.
Yeah.
That's the only thing he ever said to me. He was nice every time. And
Yeah.
people don't know that about him. They think he's an ass, but he wasn't an ass. He was a great guy.
I wonder if he would be as funny if he was alive today than he was 10 years ago. I think everything has to be politically correct today.
It's bad.
People are so sensitive about everything. And I don't know whether they'd accept this humor as well as they did 10 years ago. Maybe. The reason Don got away with it was when they went, they knew what they were going to get. And they knew it was a put on. So they knew that wasn't really him.
And he was older. If he was 28 years old doing it now, it would be different.
But if you were from another country and had never seen or heard of Don Rickles, and you went to see him, you might say to yourself, this guy's awful. Putting people down, being obnoxious, and God, he's terrible, you know. But if you knew him and knew that it was all a put on,
oh, he was great.
and how quick and fast he was, you admired him greatly. But I don't know whether he'd be as popular today.
And Sinatra loved him.
I know that Foster Brooks was pretty funny, but I don't know whether he would be as funny today because people are sensitive about drinking. You know?
Same with Dudley Moore. I did a show right before he died, and people were walking out. They didn't like the drunk routine.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a shame.
yeah. That's
Because I'm
true.
telling you, Rickles, he was a good actor too.
Very good actor.
Kelly's Heroes is great.
Oh, he's an excellent actor.
He's in the, what's that Robert De Niro movie? I can't think of the name of Casino.
Casino, yeah.
He's great.
Very good.
Even those silly beach movies are funny.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Cosell. You got a great Cosell story.
Cosell. Do you realize, Rich, if you could talk in my voice 24 hours a day, there is no degree to greatness you could not obtain in the world of show business. That's what he said to me. I liked Howard. He was full of himself, you know.
Of course he was.
Very pompous and everything, but like Stuart Granger, I kind of liked him. I kind of like people like that.
Talk about the plane.
Oh yeah, yeah. We were doing some kind of a show in upstate New York, and he had to get back to New York, and I had to get back to New York, and so they sent a plane for him, but they sent a prop plane, and he went absolutely nuts. A man of my stature, what I've done in show business, a superstar, and they send a prop plane. He was infuriated. And I said, well, I'm taking the plane. I got to get to New York. I will not fly in a prop plane. I'm too big a star. So he drove all the way to New York.
Oh, he didn't take the plane?
Didn't take the plane, no. Wouldn't go in a prop plane.
Okay, I met Robert. I have a picture with Robert Goulet. I think he's great. Tell me about Robert Goulet.
Robert Goulet?
Yeah.
Oh, I
he's
love
great.
Bob Goulet.
He's another one that's over the top.
He's very larger than life. Yeah, Bob was. Yeah. I remember one time we were performing at the Sands, and Bob had a habit of punching people. He always punched people. He would come up to you if you hadn't seen him in a while, and he'd say, great to see you, and then he'd punch you in the arm. Sometimes he'd hurt, you know, and he didn't want to say anything, because that's just the way he was. But he had a habit of just sort of punching people. And one time we were performing at the Sands Hotel, and he went out to do his routine and do his songs and everything, and then he went into the audience, and he started punching people and doing jokes. And then he'd go back on stage and finish his act. And then he came backstage and he said to me, how did you like the act? I said, you were great, Bob, but you know, there was one guy who kept punching and I thought he was going to get upset. Oh, that guy had no sense of humor at all. And I said, do you know who that was? He said, no, who? That was George Foreman. It was? He was punching George Foreman. Idiot, you could have got bedecked by him. And he was so embarrassed you wouldn't believe.
Oh,
he would imagine punching George Foreman.
His voice was great.
Oh, he was a great singer.
He was wonderful. That song, I couldn't leave you.
If ever I would leave you. Yeah.
Camelot?
One time we did a routine, which I use in my show, where Bob and I were singing together. And it's quite funny because he kept breaking up. Because I had a mustache on like him. And I was imitating and doing all his moves. And every time he looked at me, he started laughing. It's a very funny bit.
Now, Orson Welles, you worked with him a couple times. The time I'm curious about, because I'm from Phoenix, you made a movie in Phoenix.
Yeah.
What's the name of the movie again?
The Other Side of the Wind.
Okay.
Yeah, and I spent 3 weeks with him,
Okay.
playing a part with Orson directing, and John Huston was one of the actors, and it was terrific. But we didn't get it finished. And I had commitments. I had some club dates I couldn't get out of. So I had to leave. And Orson said, "You got to finish the movie." I said, "Orson, I'd love to finish the movie, but I can't. I'll get sued if I don't do these club dates." So I left. And I didn't finish the movie because I had no choice. And then Peter Bogdanovich came in and took my part over, and they started from the beginning again and reshot all my scenes. So I'm not in the final movie.
You're not.
No, but it was a wonderful experience working with Orson. He was terrific.
I love the conversations he had with Houston.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, they both would agree on everything. You know, they admired each other so much. But I used to have lunch with them, and just to hear them talk about Hollywood and everything, you know. And Houston was an interesting guy. I remember we did a scene where we were driving in a car, and John Huston was driving. I was next to him, and Orson was in the back, wedged into the back. Took about 10 minutes to get him in the back seat with a camera shooting us talking in the front. And we had dialogue. And as we were doing the scene, he kept wandering off the road. We were going through people's backyards. And then he turned to me and he said, "You know, I've never learned to drive a car. I've never had a license." And I thought, what the hell? We're doing a scene in a car. He's driving and he's never driven before. And I said, "Good God, we're coming up to a what do you call it? A canal. We're coming up to a canal." And I said, "He can't drive, and we're going to go right in the canal." And I thought, well, that was it. Because with Orson in the back, with his weight, and John Huston and I in the front, we'd go right under immediately. And Orson said, he said, "Well, you know, when they put the obituaries out in the paper, you're going to get third billing."
They're too much. How big was Orson? Was he that big?
Very big. Very big. Yeah, when he would direct a scene, he would want to get up and show us how to do the scene. We'd say, don't get up, because that would take 5 minutes just for him to get out of the chair. And I remember he wore tennis shoes and they were never tied up. I thought he was going to trip on the laces of the tennis shoe because he couldn't tie them up. He couldn't reach down to tie up his shoe.
There's a book about him that I haven't read yet. It's called Lunches with Orson. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
That's another thing. I'll try to get you some stuff. But it's about this one guy that goes to lunch with Orson all the time, and he tells him all these stories.
Oh, he was a great storyteller.
But that voice is amazing. And he was on your, one more thing before I go to the Copycats. He had you do like Cronkite's voice and Brokaw's voice. Didn't he do it for a scene? You were coming out of a window or doing something?
Oh, no, that was when we did the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were doing this movie with John Huston in Phoenix. And it was a story about an older actor, played by John Huston, and I was his assistant. And I remember there was a scene where I was talking to him through a window, John Huston, and Orson came up to me and he said, "Do the scene again, only this time do it as Johnny Carson." I said, "What?" "And then we'll shoot it again and you can do it as Andy Rooney." I said, "What?" "And then maybe Dr. Ruth." I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "Because when they go to dub the movie in Spain, they'll have a fit. They won't know how to dub it. They won't know who these people are."
So he's funny.
Yeah.
So when you did okay, let's talk about your Copycats show. And why did you do it in London?
Copycats?
Yeah, why in London?
It was a London production.
Oh, okay. That's
done at
why.
Elstree.
Okay.
Yeah. Lou Grade, yeah. And that's where we did Copycats. And Orson was on the show.
And how was he on the show?
He was great. The first time I met him, I was doing a routine. I was doing famous movie stars sneezing. You know, like Cary Grant sneezing. Achoo! You know, Louis Armstrong sneezing. Achoo, choo, choo, choo. And I was doing this whole routine on people sneezing. And then I said, Orson Welles sneezing. And he come in the studio. I'd never met him before, just off the plane. And he walked over to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, I never sneeze.
It's too bad about his weight because he could have got some more roles to make more money to make his movies. Don't you think?
Yeah.
You can't be that big. How Brando got movies being that big is beyond me.
Well, you know, Orson would put a false nose on,
Okay.
put a false nose on him and do some of these horrible movies just to make money,
Yeah.
so he could finish movies that he was interested in. Some of them he never finished. He never finished The Other Side of the Wind, really. They put it together and finally released it, but it was never really finished.
It's too bad. Howard Keel. I really like Howard Keel.
Oh, Howard Keel.
He was a nice man. I met him.
Oh, he was a sweetheart.
He was a big guy.
Big guy, yeah. Great voice, great sense of humor, and that was a great friendship I had with him.
Tell him about the John Wayne messing with him. What happened between those two? They were making.
They didn't get along.
What was it called? The movie.
It was
War Wagon
War Wagon, yeah,
with Kirk Douglas.
with Kurt Douglas, yeah. Yeah, he didn't get along with John Wayne. He didn't get along with Jerk Granger either.
We didn't.
No, I remember one time I went out to dinner with Stuart Granger and Howard Keel. We went to dinner in Malibu. And I remember Stuart Granger said to Howard Keel, was there anybody when you were at MGM, because you were there at the same time I was there anybody at MGM you really didn't like? And you know what Howard said? Well, I wasn't too thrilled about you.
That's funny. That just got my back.
And Granger just made a face and didn't say anything. I wasn't too thrilled about you. Can you imagine?
Well, those guys.
They were a lot similar, and both of them were larger than life, but except that Howard was a much easier guy to get along with than Granger was.
I met him at it was probably 17 years ago. I met him they had these autograph sessions near the airport in Los Angeles. And he was there signing autographs, and I talked to him for a little bit. And he was wonderful.
Oh, he was great.
Really. And he was big, he was just a big man, and he was nice. Okay, you got to talk about meeting John Wayne, because everyone wants to.
Well, the first time I met John Wayne was, he was doing a guest shot on Laugh-In, and they had him in a bunny costume.
Yeah, really.
And I was intrigued with this, and I'd never met him before, so I was shooting a series called Love on a Rooftop next door, and I went over to the studio to see John Wayne do his routine in a bunny costume, which was very funny. And then when he finished that and he got out of his bunny costume, he was standing there, and I finally thought, I've been here long enough, and he doesn't know me and everything, and I got to get back to my other studio. So I was just about to leave, and John Wayne said, Little, don't you leave this studio until you show me how I do my walk. I'm losing it. And I thought, what? Come over here. So I went over, and I thought, oh my God. He said, do my walk for me. And so everybody sort of spread apart, and I did John Wayne's walk for him, and he was looking at me, and I went right up to the end of the studio and right back with my John Wayne walk. And then he looked at me and he said, well, I'll be damned. I've been walking like Loretta Young for 30 years.
It's funny. But these guys are great. They're going to live forever in their movies and stuff.
Yeah, so long as people watch the old movies.
And they are. They're making, I think they're so successful. Turner Classic Movies is doing so well. And now there's some TV stations, like one's called MeTV, where they play all the old shows.
Really?
And you have it here for sure. I just don't know what station it is. But it's
MeTV?
It's called METV. Masterful Entertainment Memorial Entertainment, and it's on over the air, but it's also on all the satellite systems and stuff.
Oh,
And
okay.
they'll have on Gunsmoke and Bonanza and
Yeah.
and let's talk about politicians because you do a lot. I know we got to probably end soon. Politicians. What was Humphrey like?
Hubert Humphrey?
Yeah.
He was great. I loved Hubert Humphrey. He used to come and see me perform at the Sands Hotel. And he was convinced that because he was in the audience that I cleaned it up or I made him look better than I probably did him when he wasn't there. But that wasn't true because I liked him. But he was convinced that I didn't do the show exactly the way I usually did it. So he came back the following night in a disguise. And he put a fake mustache on and an old coat and a hat. And the maitre d' phoned me and said, Hubert's back, and he's trying to look like somebody else. And he wants to see if you do the whole routine on him. And I said, I didn't change anything. And I did him exactly the way I did it when he was there. And then he came back a third night, about a week later, in another disguise. Because he wasn't convinced that he saw me doing him the way I usually do it in the show.
Nixon at that party. Talk about Reynolds.
Yeah, I did Richard Nixon in front of him at a party in San Clemente. And all of Hollywood was there, too. And back in those days, in the 60s, Hollywood was conservative. All the stars were conservative. There was no liberals there. There were the biggest names in show business there. And it was a garden party for Nixon, and Debbie Reynolds grabbed my arm, dragged me around the swimming pool, and threw me at the back of Richard Nixon and said, do him. And Nixon didn't know what that meant. He turned around and thought, do him? Maybe I was going to shoot him. So he looked kind of nervous, and then he realized that it was just me standing there, and he didn't know who the hell I was. And everybody started applauding, and I started to do my impression of Richard Nixon in front of him. And his wife, Pat, was standing next to him. And as I'm doing him, I'm looking at him, and he doesn't know what the hell I'm doing. And I'm doing my whole Nixon routine, and I could hear him say, why is this young man speaking in a strange voice? And Pat Nixon said, he's doing you, sir. He's doing you, honey. He's doing you. Oh, okay. So anyway, I finished my routine, got no reaction from him at all, and he turned and just walked away. And everybody was afraid to applaud because he didn't react. And George Burns said, you know, I was so embarrassed I ate a flower. And John Wayne said, somebody get a rope. And then Glenn Ford said, Rich, you better go back to Canada. And it wasn't one of my finer moments.
That's too bad. It should have been great.
Yeah, but he didn't know I was doing them.
Okay, you were friends with Reagan.
Reagan was great.
Yeah.
Loved Reagan.
He was a special man too.
Oh, God, he was the best. He had such a great sense of humor.
Was he different after he got shot at all?
Not really. No.
Okay.
No, he loved humor. Reagan did. He loved jokes. And he did a few impressions for me. Can you imagine?
It must have been great.
He did Jimmy Stewart, pretty fair, not great. He did John Wayne, and he did Truman Capote for me.
That's funny.
The President of the United States did Truman Capote for me. I'll never forget this. Everybody was like astounded when he said that. You know, Rich, I do a pretty fair Truman Capote. But unfortunately, I don't know what to say when I do them. And I said, well, Mr. President, I do Truman Capote in my act, and I'll give you a line you can use. Oh, I wouldn't want to steal any of your material. I said, no, fine, I'll be happy to do it. And he said, well, all right. So he got a Secret Service man, and he got a piece of paper, and he wrote the joke on the back of the Secret Service man's back. And he said, what is it?
And I said, well, my name is Truman Capote.
He wrote that down.
And, you know, a lot of people think that I wrote in cold blood, but that's not true. No, actually, I wrote in ink.
And Reagan thought that was hysterical. He wrote that whole thing out. And then he put it in his pocket. And you know what he said to me? I can't wait to try that out on Gorbachev.
That's funny.
Can you imagine him doing Truman Capote for Gorbachev? I would have given a year's salary to see that.
And I got to ask you this, and people, I don't want to keep you forever, but you got to tell me about calling Betty Davis. You're on the way to...
that's a long story.
Okay, I want to ask you a few other questions. Are there people that you never wouldn't impersonate, like a Hitler? Because like Mussolini, he was kind of funny. Would you not do something like that?
Mussolini? How would you do Mussolini?
You know, kind of like a Brando almost. I'm just saying, are there people you purposely don't do?
Well, there are people I can't do, you know. A lot of the film stars of today I have trouble with. Who does Brad Pitt, you know?
But I thought of that too. He's good looking, but he doesn't have a
Who
voice.
does George Clooney, you know? Who does Harrison Ford? Nobody imitates these people,
No.
you know. So there's a lot of good actors, but they just don't have distinctive voices, unfortunately.
What do you think of the new roasts? Because they're awfully blue, the new roasts.
Oh, the new roasts are terrible, I think.
Okay.
And I don't say that because I'm not on them. I just don't think they're that funny. And you know, when you're crude and you're using a lot of blue material, I don't find them that funny.
You never were blue at all.
Yeah, I was, but only a couple of times in my career at a Friars roast. The Friars roasts that were not televised, they were pretty blue. And I did a couple of routines that were funny, but not for the public. That was the only time, but they were never seen, so you know. Milton Berle was always the funniest, but he was the dirtiest.
He was very talented too.
Huh?
He was great at that. Were there any opportunities that you missed that you should have taken?
Well, I was never on Saturday Night Live, ever.
Did you have an opportunity to be on there?
Well, they talked about me hosting it at one point.
Okay.
I was considered to be the host, but I wasn't. I didn't become the host, but I was never even asked on to be a guest. So I never did that show.
Earlier we talked about just a few minutes ago how Hollywood used to be very conservative, and you were friends with Reagan and that crowd.
Yeah.
Do you think that hurt your career after Reagan, after Bush, because of your association with some of those people, with the conservative people? Because Hollywood's very liberal.
If I was first starting out in Hollywood, was younger, and was going to be an actor, say, it probably would hurt me. Yeah, being a conservative. But like John Voight is, what the heck? At my age, what are they going to do to me?
Okay.
And I don't make movies, and I perform at the Tropicana here in Vegas, so who even knows about it? So, you know, I don't think they'd go after me. But if I was younger, they probably would.
In Phoenix, where I live, a lot of places are getting torn down. Little places that they don't really mean that much, but places that are important to people that live there. You lived in Vegas for how long?
I've lived in Vegas since, since I came here in '64, but not all the time.
Okay. Vegas has changed a lot.
Oh, yeah.
What do you miss about the old Vegas?
The old days in Vegas, I think, were better because there were more single performers. You know, you went to Vegas to see Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Danny Thomas, Red Skelton, you know, Buddy Hackett, single performers. And today there are still some single performers, but not as many. There's production shows now, you know, big extravaganzas.
Yeah.
And we didn't have those back in the 60s, or very few. There were a lot of magic acts, but that was about it. So it changed and became more for families, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an improvement at all.
I don't either.
There's still a lot of good shows, but not so many single performers. I'm one of the few, you know. Wayne Newton is still performing. I'm still performing, and There's a few of my age group, but not many.
Did you get to see Elvis in '69, '70 when he first came out?
Yeah.
How was that?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
I got to meet him.
Oh, you did?
Spent some time with him. He's very nice, very polite, very humble, and he was great. He knew who I was, and I can only say good things about him. You know, that wasn't near the end, though. That was probably 10 or 15 years before
Okay.
he packed it in, you know.
Is there anything particular you miss about the 60s and 70s Vegas? Because I came here in like 1980-ish, so it was even different then.
Yeah.
It was really cheap then too. I think you could come here.
It was really cheap.
It's expensive now.
If you look at some of the prices of you go to see Frank Sinatra at the Sands and have dinner, it was like $12. You know, amazing, isn't it?
I spent $20 on breakfast. I spent $20 on breakfast and just had eggs and toast at Tropicana. It's a lot more. It seems like there's less gambling and more. The hotel rooms are more. The food's
Yeah.
more. Maybe I'm wrong.
Food is a much bigger
Yeah.
issue now than it was. Shopping is still big, but things are expensive if you buy at the hotels. But food is very important here, and there's a lot of visual shows to see, you know, where they show fireworks and stuff, you know.
If you had to do it all over again, would you make any changes in your career?
I don't think so. I might have pursued movies more. I was only in a couple of films. I was not a movie star at all. I only made a couple of movies that were not very memorable. And then I did my own television series, but that only lasted for a season. So that was fun, and it went over great, but didn't last. The things that I'm probably best known for are the roasts, the Tonight Show, and Hollywood Squares.
I like Peter Marshall. I interviewed him a couple years ago. He's a good guy. I liked him.
Good guy.
Any performers? There's one guy I didn't really know him that well. When I saw his face, I knew he was Anthony Newley.
Oh, Anthony Newley was one of my favorite entertainers of all time.
Really?
Oh my God. He was so dramatic, and he sang with such feeling. He had that kind of Cockney accent, which some people didn't like, but you know, when he sang "What Kind of Fool Am I," it was incredible. I used to stand in the wings. He opened for me a couple of times, and I used to stand in the wings and watch him do his show almost every night, and I couldn't believe how good he was.
Anybody else that people don't know about?
Well, there's a lot of impersonators that never made it that I think are great.
Okay.
You know, I know a couple of people like Kathy Walker, who worked with me in a show called Copycats, and Gordie Brown, who was down at the Golden Nugget. He's a terrific impersonator. Wonderful guy, and very modern, very fast. Does about 30 impressions in 10 minutes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And he's very good.